Cyprian Ivanov. In reference to the recent events at the Capitol, it seems like the broader Trump base was attracted to him for his self-confidence, broad statements, and his image of being high energy, in part probably projected by his repeating redundant words instead of pausing to think. Of the people who showed up to his rallies recently, they were probably among those who most clung to him as a savior rather than as a regular politician. Something was already unhealthy with the thinking of the people who showed up. Somehow they weren't treating politics as a complicated series of long and short-term calculations and negotiations. Somehow they reduced it to individual personalities. That is a perspective that seems rather strange to some observers. You had previously mentioned that LRH had presented all politics as being controlled by less than 12 men. There seems to be some weird habit of treating the massive scale and complexity of society as if it was merely the will of an individual instead of a diffuse network where a handful of people serve as connecting nodes for information streams. Could you comment on this? Thanks for the question, Cyprian. And of course, I'm going to first say, in reference to your question, that it's surprising to you that people are treating politics not as a complicated series of negotiations or short and long-term calculations. Well, yeah. A lot of people don't think about politics that way. They personalize it and they bring it down to their own interests and influences and their own needs and wants. And if a politician is saying the things that they need to hear in order for them to feel reassured that this person is fighting for them and their needs, then this is a good politician or a good person. And if they are not, or if they represent the opposite of my moral values or my worldview, then they are bad people. They're bad politicians. What we're seeing here more broadly, though, when you refer to this, this idea of how this weird habit of treating the massive scale and complexity of society as the will of an individual, what you're referring to here, I believe, is the fundamental attribution error. And this is a really, really bedrock important principle. In fact, it is, in some ways of thinking, it is the bedrock of social psychology itself. So let me go over it a little bit because it deserves a little bit of attention. The fundamental attribution error, I'm reading here from Wikipedia just to give a quick idea of it, is the tendency for people to underemphasize situational explanations for an individual's observed behavior and overemphasize dispositional or personality-based explanations for their behavior. Okay, in other words, they will overemphasize the individual involved, and the motivations and intentions of that individual will be assumed rather than looking at the situational factors behind why somebody might act the way that they do. This is something that we see across the boards, okay? This is not partisan. This is not political even. Fundamental attribution error is something that occurs to all of us all the time, all day long. And it is sort of the immediate leap that we all make to personalize an error or problem or situation to the person. Okay, and the classic example, which I'll repeat here again, I think I've said it before, is the traffic. Okay, is a simple explanation of this is, I'm driving along in traffic, I get cut off, okay, by Joe. Joe cuts me off rudely, right in my way. I have to brake. I almost have an accident. I'm very upset. I, of course, immediately believe that Joe is an asshole. He's a bad driver. He's a dick. He meant to do that. Or I could think of any number of things that would implicate Joe personally as a bad, evil human being for cutting me off in traffic. And I would assume that I was right about those things because within my knowledge and experience of Joe, some jerk that I've never seen who just cuts me off in traffic, I have to think, well, why would this person do this? Well, it's because he's a self-centered prick. That's why, right? He clearly isn't thinking about anybody else but himself. And what a selfish driver. And, and this is why road rage happens. And look at this. And, people should be, people need to learn how to drive and, these kinds of things. Okay. It could well be, right, that the actual objective truth is that Joe cut me off because he's got a pregnant wife in the back of his car who's about to drop a kid. And he is racing to the hospital because 15 minutes ago his wife was fine and there wasn't an issue. And suddenly she's having a baby, right? And here we go. And he has to get her to the hospital. And I'm in the way. And I'm driving along. And I'm not particularly paying a lot of attention to what's going on around me. My situational awareness is a little low at that moment. Here comes this guy barreling out of nowhere, cuts me off. Well, he's probably thinking, I got to get my wife to the hospital right now. Look at all these jerks in my way. Look at all these stupid drivers, slow drivers, all these people who don't know how to drive. Can't they pay attention? Don't they see what's happening? And he's going to commit the fundamental attribution error on every one of these drivers that he's running into. It's human nature. It's just what we do. But the truth of the matter is that if you could see the larger picture, this is what we call perspective, right? Proportionality. This is what is missing in a lot of the reporting that we get on news media. It's not a matter of they're telling us false things. That does happen, no question about it. But where the information's true or factual, it's skewed by perspective shift or by proportionality. It's not given in a sense in comparison or ratio to other information, which would give you, which would make you realize that this is not, this screaming, fire emergency that they try to report every single story as. So the fundamental attribution error is a big deal. And when it comes to religion and politics, which are the two, as far as I can tell, the two most contentious, difficult topics, because they are steeped in subjective belief and subjective understandings rather than objective facts, you're going to get a whole lot of these fundamental attribution errors happening. Okay, so to get to, to bring this back around to your question, this weird habit of treating the massive scale and complexity of society as if it was merely the will of an individual is not a weird habit. It's a normal process of the brain in an effort to try to bring the complexity of situations that are actually mostly beyond most of our ability to deal with on a minute-to-minute, day-to-day, sort of hour-to-hour basis. We don't have a lot of processing power to hold lots and lots of ideas in our head at once. We have to categorize and we have to simplify. We've got to be able to make the world make sense in a fairly simple way. And yes, we can deal with intensely complex things like quantum physics formulas or chemistry formulas or astrophysics things or, some really complicated stuff. But notice the people who do that. And the people who are capable of that kind of thinking and what it takes and the years and years of discipline that it takes to train your mind to be able to think that way, that's not for everybody. Your regular, ordinary, average Joe person, isn't doing that for a reason. It's because they either don't want to or don't have the ability to or don't have the time or resources to. So what the brain does instead is it goes, hey, we need to simplify things. And this is an oversimplification. It's a logical fallacy, but it's not, I'm only trying to point out that it's not weird. It's not an oddball, strange behavior that people do this. It's how you survive. Otherwise, you'd have to deal with the intense complexity of national, as well as state and local level politics every time you tried to, consider any issue or any circumstance or any position. It's a lot easier to just go, okay, well, I'm going to put all my thinking and beings into an individual who I can understand, who personifies or symbolizes for me the values that I want to see reflected in the political sphere. And that's why we have politicians, and that's why we have political platforms, and that's why we invest so heavily, even emotionally, into these individuals. And it makes itself open to or susceptible to cults of personality by its nature. It's just the process. It's the way that this stuff rolls out and how we interact with it. So That's what I can say most basically to address your question, Cyprian. I hope that that helps answer the question. It doesn't make it any easier to deal with any of these fundamental attribution errors, but at least understanding them, you can see that what's going on is that people are doing the very natural thing of personifying their problems and simplifying them down so that they can understand them and they can talk about them and they can deal with them and think about them in a way that is energy efficient for the brain and is simple enough and symbolically easy enough that they that it doesn't that's not a strain. We have to think that way. It's just how we are. So anyway, and by that I mean we have to think in terms of simplifying things. I don't mean we have to think with logical fallacies. With training, with discipline, you can overcome it. But your instinct is always going to be to go in that direction. And that's why critical thinking is a skill set that you have to learn and not just something you naturally have or do.